Hello, Euro nerds, and welcome to this detailed presentation on how to craft the long essay question. I will walk you through the 6-point rubric and give you some hints and tricks and whatnot. So a little background about myself. I'm a grader for the AP Euro exam. I've been doing it for a number of years at this point, and I've graded thousands upon thousands of student responses. So I have a pretty good amount of knowledge on what works and what doesn't. So you'll see that reflected in this presentation. Additionally, this presentation has been updated to also reflect some of the changes that will go into effect the 2026-2027 school year. So here we go. All right, first, if you're curious what each part of the AP Euro exam is worth, you can look at this kind of graphic here. Interestingly enough, the LEQ is worth actually the least, but regardless, it is still pretty important. It's a very classic thesis-proof essay that I think is beneficial to know how to write more than just taking AP Euro or AP United States History. I suspect it will follow you through your college years as well. Also keep in mind, I've created this presentation to succeed on a timed exam. So the LEQ is typically written in approximately 40 minutes. So some of the tips and tricks I'm giving you is with that in mind. If I knew you had an unlimited amount of time that you're writing at home, I would give you different suggestions. So overall, the LEQ is going to really test your ability to make a thesis statement to a prompt and providing evidence and argumentation to substantiate that thesis statement, hence why it's called the thesis-proof essay. Okay, so first things first, there are 3 forms of LEQ prompts, and they will test you on the 3 historical thinking skills, which is comparison or compare-contrast, causation, which is really cause and effect, and continuity and change over time that you will often see abbreviated as CCOT. And really the first thing you're going to find is you have to figure out what the prompt is asking you to write about. So one of the changes that is going to go into effect in the 2026-2027 school year and beyond is the LEQ prompts are going to be worded pretty generally. So this second one right here, this causation question, was released by the College Board last, I think it was May or June, and it's pretty general. And what they're trying to have you do is find evidence that you remember from the course and incorporate that into your response. And as you can see, the timeline they give you is pretty widespread. So what they're doing is they're allowing you to write about what you know, as opposed to kind of like a gotcha is what some of the previous questions have been about. So the other 2 prompts that you see here are more of the old school LEQ questions, and I still think they're beneficial. They're still going to be used in my exemplars in the rest of this presentation, but this second one here is really what you can expect going forward. All right, so the LEQ rubric is worth 6 points, and I'm going to walk you through each one, giving you incorrect examples and correct examples of what would get the point or not. Please keep in mind, every single one of these points is earned individually, okay? So in theory, they are not related to the others, but as you're going to see, they kind of do have some overlap with your responses. Additionally, there are no half points. There's no partial credit given in the AP history rubrics. The closest example would be like the evidence point here, which is 1 or 2 points, but even still, it's not really partial credit. So keep that in mind. There is no partial credit. Some teachers may give like half a point for a partially right thesis statement, but that's up to them. The actual AP rubric is not graded with partial credit. You get the point or you don't. Okay, so the first part. First point is the thesis statement. Arguably the most important part of this essay, in my opinion. It is really tough to write a good LEQ without an acceptable thesis statement. Yes, it's actually possible to get some points without a successful thesis statement, but I'm trying to teach you how to write well, not just how to score well on a rubric here. So first thing I kind of like to remind students is there is an acronym that could be helpful. I call it PEP. So it stands for Prompts, examples, position. So you look at the prompt and figure out what are the key words. Is it telling you to compare something? Is it asking you to show a causation of something, an effect of something? Whatever it might be, incorporate some of those key terms into your thesis statement. The next part of a successful thesis statement will have specific examples that are not overly generic. It shows the AP reader that you know what you're talking about. It tells the AP reader what evidence you're going to use in the remainder of your essay. Historians are kind of unique in how we write. We want to know precisely what you're going to write about in your introduction. And then obviously the details will come about in the body paragraphs, but we want to know exactly what you're going to write about after the first paragraph, the introduction. And then the next part of a key good thesis statement is you need to have a line of reasoning. You have to state your position and then support it with a line of reasoning. So I'm going to teach my students to write gray area thesis statements, also known as complex thesis statements, where they show nuance, but they ultimately do take a side. The line of reasoning will often use the word because. You take your position and then you have to substantiate your position with a line of reasoning. All of that has to be together in order to receive the point. Next, your thesis statement, it really should be in the introduction. Yes, I know it can also be in the conclusion, but put it in your introduction. Make it the last sentence or sentences in your intro. Lastly, with your thesis statement, it doesn't have to be one sentence. When I personally write them, I'm usually in the 2-sentence, sometimes 3-sentence ballpark. Err on that side of caution, err on the side of specificity. Don't be married to this idea of a 1-sentence thesis statement. It can be really as many as they need to be. Okay, so your thesis statement has to answer the prompt. If you don't answer the prompt with historically defensible evidence with a line of reasoning, you're not getting the point. So let's, look at some generic exemplars on the bottom here. So first, make sure what you're writing about is correct. It can't be historically inaccurate. For example, Adolf Hitler was a driving force in Benito Mussolini's rise to power in Spain in the 1920s. There's a lot wrong there. I'm not going to go into it, but that's just historically inaccurate. Example 2, the expansion of Protestantism in Italy was the direct result of leadership of Henry VIII. Again, that's kind of history in a blender. There's a whole lot wrong that's being kind of thrown together here. So overall, make sure you are responding to that prompt with historically accurate evidence. Okay, so here's the task prompt we're going to use for this exemplar here. So evaluate the relative importance of the religious rivalries and dynastic ambitions that shaped the course of the 30 Years' War. So here's what would not earn a point. And yeah, I read these a lot when I grade the AP exam. So I hope you realize they're kind of, bad, but it happens. So war is an unfortunate part of history. Too many people die. Humans should stop fighting. Okay, whether that's true or not, it's still a very opinionated statement, and it doesn't even come close to even recognizing the 30 Years' War. So that's obviously a no. Now look at the difference with this one. So this student's going to start the statement with although, which kind of sets up the counter argument, the nuance. And then it's going to hit me with their main argument. So although religious tension between Protestants and Catholics in Bohemia was the main reason for the start of the 30 Years' War, dynastic ambition quickly surpassed the religion as a driving force of the war. So this student has now taken a side. They said overall it's going to be dynastic ambition, but religion did play a part, if I'm going to kind of summarize their thesis statement there. Now the student is going to provide me with their examples. Spain, France, Sweden, and the Holy Roman Empire all sought to increase their power at the expense of their longtime enemies. In particular, this can be seen in France, a predominantly Catholic country, entering the war on the side of the Protestants in order to weaken Habsburg Spain and the Habsburg-controlled Holy Roman Empire. Awesome. That is like, knock my socks off kind of thesis statement. Well done. All right, same prompt. Let's see what this student does. Religious rivalries and dynastic ambitions shaped the course of the 30 Years' War. So what this student just did here is reword the prompt. They didn't add anything new to it. So yeah, you should be kind of rewording the prompt, but this literally is just the prompt reworded. There's nothing else there. So make sure you're going beyond a simple rewording. All right, now we have a new prompt. Compared to the Middle Ages, how did the Italian Renaissance humanism transform the ideas about the individual's role in society? So here we have the incorrect. The Renaissance was a better time for individuals than the Middle Ages. So again, there's really nothing there. It's just kind of a generic rewording, throwing something, but it's super general. There's no specificity. We don't like it. Now give this a read and look for the counter argument, which will usually start with the word although. Then the student's main argument, which will state their position, and then their line of reasoning will encompass the specific examples that really will answer the prompt in more detail later in the body paragraphs. Well done. All right. This is a very common incorrect thesis statement that I will read about. So same prompt. Humanism transformed individuals such as Michelangelo, Machiavelli, or Rembrandt during the Italian Renaissance. First of all, Rembrandt wasn't the Italian Renaissance, so that's not accurate. But all this is saying is that Michelangelo and Machiavelli, they changed something. It's not saying what they changed. If it says the what, then the student's probably going to get the thesis point. But all it says is there was a change. So make sure you're specific on what the change was. Just say it. Don't make me, the grader, kind of guess what that's about. So read the correct exemplar here, where you're going to see a lot more specificity. Okay. On to point number 2, which is the contextualization. So really, I'm presenting this as how the AP rubric is laid out for teachers. You're actually going to write your contextualization before your thesis statement in your intro. So in your intro, you're going to satisfy 2 points in the rubric. The first point you're going to satisfy is the contextualization, which is here. And then the second point will be the thesis statement, which is how you're going to end your introduction. So read through what the College Board states is an acceptable contextualization. So really what you have to do is you got to figure out the preceding historical events that affect whatever you're writing about. And kind of the trick here is you got to name something. You got to name a specific fact. Name a historical event. Name a person and what they did. If you do that with specific evidence, you're much more likely to get the contextualization point than something that's too general. I see so many context attempts where it's overly generic, too big of a picture like statement, and you're not going to get the point here. So be more specific than you think. And in my experience, students who successfully get this point are usually writing 2 to 3 sentences. Sometimes 4, but usually 2 to 3 is kind of a nice sweet spot there. So let's look at some exemplars. You can read them on your own. In this kind of pinkish fuchsia color is the context, and then the thesis statement is in red. So give it a read. So the sentence that really helps out the student to get the context point here is this last one right here. The Italian Renaissance saw a rebirth of classical values from ancient Greece and Rome. That's that specific evidence we are looking for. And then connects it to the Middle Ages and what it's kind of replacing there. Well done, student. That's getting the point. Okay, next we have the 2 evidence points. So you can earn 0, 1, or 2. So this is where I find students kind of start sorting themselves into different groups here. And it's kind of pretty clear when you're grading so many of these what the student's overall score is going to be after you start seeing how they're using their evidence, okay? So this was a pretty recent change on the College Board, is they actually named how much evidence you need to get 1 point. So now they are saying you need to address the topic of the question with at least 2 specific pieces of evidence relevant to the prompt. That's the key part. It still needs to be appropriate for the prompt. So you have to name 2 different things that is going to support the ideas in the prompt. So most students can usually get 1 point here. You just gotta name something and then describe what happened, okay? The difference with the second point is you still need to name 2 pieces of evidence, describe those 2 pieces of evidence with some detail, but also actually link it to your argument, your thesis statement. If you don't do that, then you're probably only going to get 1 point. So let me also reference some things that might be issues here. What if you only have 1 piece of acceptable evidence? Guess what? you're getting 0 points for the evidence point. I know, it kind of sucks, but it is what it is. So you have to have 2 different pieces of evidence. Usually what students do is they'll have one body paragraph for their first major piece of evidence, a second body paragraph for their second piece of evidence. Some students combine them. I don't recommend it, but I think having 2 distinct body paragraphs makes your life easier. So read through these statements here on the bottom to get a little bit better of an idea. Okay, next, analysis and reasoning. So this is where the historical thinking skills really come into play. Again, there are 3 of them. Comparison, like compare, contrast, causation, cause, effect, and CCOT, continuity and change over time. So what you need to do is, in your essay, actually compare your evidence. Causation, show cause and effect, or continuity and change over time. Show how something stays the same or changes over time. So in theory, you need to do it once to get the point, but I'm trying to make you guys better writers, not just score well on a rubric. So you should be doing this throughout your essay, continually showing cause and effect, continually comparing throughout your body paragraphs, because that's what good writers do. So let's look at some examples of what I see so much of is students will implicitly analyze their evidence. Basically, they make the reader do the work in connecting their evidence to their thesis statement, or the explicit analysis, which is they do the work for the reader, which is exactly what we want. So please read the task, then the student's thesis statement, which is correct and would get the point, and then the first example, which just shows implicit analysis, and then the second example, which shows explicit analysis. Go. So the major difference between the implicit analysis and the explicit analysis is basically the implicit analysis, the student merely describes their historical evidence, which is good, you need to do that, but they're not actually showing any connection to political ambition, religious ambition. They're making that reader do that for them. This response doesn't leave any room for the reader to put those pieces of the puzzle together. That entire response you see in future here, that is explicit analysis. That's what we want to do. All right, so next is a difficult point to attain, and some AP graders, AP teachers call it the unicorn point because it's, less than common to achieve. Every year you're looking at maybe less than 10% of students nationwide will receive the complexity point or the complexity of argument point on the LEQ because it's challenging, right? However, it's designed to really show students who have really strong grasp of their history, who are good writers to a certain extent, but really have a strong grasp of historical argumentation, okay? Using it with evidence, obviously. So in the last few years, the College Board has really widened the avenues to achieve the complexity point, and I have them bulleted for you, okay? So please pause this and read through these bullet points here. And I'll do my best to explain the ones that I think are most attainable, but there's quite a few avenues to achieve this point. Go. Okay, so you may have kind of honed in on which of these avenues to attain complexity might work best for you, but I'll reference ones that I think I see done well the most as an AP grader, okay? So first one is the second bullet point here, is explaining both similarity or difference for a comparison essay, explaining both continuity and change for CCOT, and explaining multiple causes or multiple effects for the causation stuff. So the issue there is it sounds actually pretty easy to do that, but once again, you have to continually kind of do this throughout your essay to make it obvious to the reader that you're continually showing cause and effect. You're continually showing comparison throughout your paper. You can't just do it once. It has to be pretty consistent overall to really make it, to highlight it for the reader, okay? So that one I would say is fairly doable, but you really got to know your history to do this. The next one I would say is this is for the students who have a very strong grasp of evidence, who really know their history. So instead of having just 2 pieces of evidence that support your thesis statement, you actually have 4. So you double the amount of evidence that you're writing about, connected to all 4 of them are connected to your thesis statement, you're going to get the complexity point. I see a lot of students do this successfully, assuming they have enough time with writing. So one of the challenges with this last way of getting complexity is the LEQ is traditionally written at the very end of the exam, where they give you one time period, right, both the DBQ essay and the LEQ, and students might be running out of time. So you might just run out of time and not, even if you know 4 examples, you might just not have enough time to do that. So just keep that in mind. Time is of the essence on the LEQ, okay? So hopefully it isn't, but it very well might be. I also like nuance here. So one of the reasons I teach my students to write counter arguments and a main argument is you're showing nuance. You're not saying it's just one thing that affects this thing. You're saying it's all of these things, but this one is most important. Or you're showing an exception to your argument, and you're actually arguing that it's just an exception and not actually changing our entire understanding of whatever the historical event is. So if you're arguing that nuance, then you very well might get this point. But you can't just say the nuance. You have to argue it, connect it to your thesis statement. Don't let the reader do that for you. You have to do that. So one more, I think this is just my suspicion going into the 2026-2027 school year. I suspect I might start seeing students write this more on the AP exam. I don't have anything to go by that. I'm just guessing. So explaining relevant and insightful connections within and across periods. So I go back to that prompt I showed you at the beginning of the presentation. That was about, what's a cause of a political revolution, effect of a political revolution, whatever it is. And say the student's 2 major examples like the French Revolution of 1789 and then the Russian Revolution in 1917. And like you show how, one of the causes of the French Revolution was, supporting the American colonists during the American Revolution, put the French treasury into more debt, which, fueled the debt crisis even further. And then for the Russian Revolution, the Russian Empire is fighting World War I, which is also draining the coffers, harming the economy. That's a really cool comparison across time. That would probably achieve the complexity, assuming the student makes that connection. They can't just talk about the causes of the French Revolution and then talk about the causes of the Russian Revolution. You got to make that link for the reader. So do the job for the reader, not the other way around. Lastly, something to keep in mind for the complexity point is just the name of the point. It's called complexity of argument. Do you have a complex understanding of the content and the given historical thinking skill? If it's obvious you do, yeah, you can probably get the point. But if it kind of shows some gaps in knowledge, limited argumentation, you're not going to get that point. So remember, complex argument, complex understanding means exactly what it means. So here's an example of the student is writing a prompt that's mostly about causation, which is how does Italian Renaissance humanism affect the artwork of the time or the role of the individual, whatever it might be. But the student then brings in their own example of kind of continuity. So if you read the section in red here, the student's kind of now showing this continuity in medieval art as well as this new Renaissance art for the time. All right, next we have qualifies or modifies the argument by considering diverse views as evidence. I'll be honest, I find this example to be on the more rare side. The student has a very strong understanding of how historians write about history. For example, what does a military historian really focus on versus a social historian versus a Marxist historian? So give it a read, but I suspect this one might be a little more challenging to attain. Okay, this avenue to attain the complexity point is one of my preferred ways. This is where having a counter argument comes into play in your thesis statement and having an entire body paragraph that supports your counter argument. The key part for attaining this point, though, is that when you're showing your counter argument, the nuance, maybe the exception to your main argument, you're not disavowing your main argument. You're not completely doing a 180 here. You're just showing that here's an exception to the main argument I made. And as long as you're arguing it as an exception, then you very well might get the point here. So in this case, the prompt again is about how does Italian Renaissance humanism transform the role of the individual. So most of the essay, all the main argument body paragraphs, have been about how humanism has changed the artwork, the literature of the time, the politics of the time, what have you. And then here we have an entire body paragraph that talks about not only an exception to that rule, but almost like a reaction to that secularization of politics that the Renaissance was experiencing, using the example of Savonarola, who was a pretty fiery Dominican friar who turned Florence into a theocratic state. So give it a read, and again, noting how this is an exception to that main argument. So here is it's a very similar example of showing nuance, offering other evidence that kind of shows an exception to the rule. So give it a read, and then the example is in this red text here. Let's go. Here is an example of a student showing connections across time. One of the key parts here is you really can't kind of go off your rocker on making comparisons to, between very different historical events. It is challenging, okay? So in my experience, you're more likely to achieve this point if you keep it within reason on the historical timeline, maybe keep it within the same country, something like that. So this example shows how France, despite being a Catholic country, has often allied itself with Protestant states despite being Catholic. And they're showing kind of three parts there. And that would definitely show this idea of connections across time. With King Henry IV, the first Bourbon, who converted from Protestant to Catholic, issued the Edict of Nantes, which allowed some religious toleration for Protestants in France. Then with the issue of the 30 Years' War, where France allies itself with the Protestants against the Catholics. And then connecting it all the way back to the Schmalkaldic Wars, where the French king still allied themselves with the Protestants. So kind of like this continuity in French history where whoever the Habsburgs are, they're going to be fighting them and ally themselves with who's ever fighting them. So that would be an example of, the comparisons across time. So just be careful that you're not kind of going really crazy with that, because I often see it's not really done well. All right, so this next section, if you're one of my students, this is the grading conversion that I am currently using, although that is subject to change year to year. So if you're kind of curious what each point on the rubric means, more or less, there's kind of like a rough percentage conversion. Just note that the College Board doesn't use that conversion chart. They have their own, matrix that they use. But there you go. Okay, so some final thoughts on how to organize your LEQ. For the most part, this is going to be a 4 or 5 paragraph essay for most students. You have your introduction, which contains your contextualization, and your thesis statement. Your first body paragraph, which has one specific example supporting your main argument. A second body paragraph that still supports your main argument with another example. And if you really know your stuff, maybe a third body paragraph that supports your counter argument. And then, of course, you have your conclusion. In AP History's conclusions aren't crazy important. They're actually not even graded on the rubric. That's where I instruct my students to kind of rewrite their thesis statement again. Because interesting enough, and if you look at the rubric very closely for the thesis statement, it says your thesis must be either in your intro or your conclusion. So say you write an attempt of a thesis statement or intro that doesn't have like a line of reasoning, you're not going to get the point there. But what the readers are trained to do for the College Board is we immediately go to your conclusion and we look for a thesis statement. If we see a thesis statement that answers the prompt, is historically defensible, and has a line of reasoning, we're going to give you the point for thesis statement. So it's almost like kind of rewriting your thesis statement, your conclusion is sort of like a buffer. It kind of gives you a little bit more ammunition to make sure you get that thesis point. Next, just as good writing, each body paragraph should have a topic sentence that basically tells the reader what you're going to write about. Again, historians are kind of formulaic in our writing. We want to know exactly what you're going to talk about before you talk about it. So don't leave any room for guessing. Have a topic sentence, a nice argumentative topic sentence, preferably, so we know what you're going to write about. Lastly, this is probably obvious, but make sure you have paragraphs. Don't write just one massive paragraph, because then, in theory, you can't really get the thesis or a lot of the points. So just make sure you have like a 4 or 5 body paragraph essay. All right, so about mechanic style proving. All right, so full disclosure, the AP exam doesn't grade you on, spelling, that type of proofreading. One thing to keep in mind, if we can't identify like what you're talking about, like you misspell something like Schmalkaldic so correctly that it looks like 30 Years War or World War II, that we're not going to accept that. So make sure your spelling is close enough so the reader knows what you're talking about. Overall, we know this is a timed first draft essay where we are looking for your argumentation and then your evidence to support your argumentation, okay? So just keep that in mind. Now, that being said, if you are writing this where time isn't of the essence, so for my students with the LEQ outlines that I assign, I expect these to look a little more polished, okay? Put some time into it. I'm trying to train you guys to be better writers more than just getting a high score on an exam. All right, so some general FAQs. The first one. Can you receive credit for 2 different paths of the rubric with one piece of evidence or analysis? So this is sort of where we're getting to the double dipping issue. For example, I see this quite a bit, is a student will have a specific piece of evidence for their context, and then they will reuse it in their body paragraph. We can only count it in one area or the other. It's up to the reader where they do that, and they're always going to err in your favor. They're not going to just be a jerk about it. But just keep that in mind. You can't, we call it double dipping. You can't use the same evidence twice and have it count twice, okay? That's also the same in the DBQ essay as well once we get there, but just keep that in mind. I've already mentioned the partial credit part. No, there is no partial credit. So overall, think about the LEQ as a work in progress. All writing is a work in progress, and it's kind of like a marathon. If you have you have that perspective that everything is progress, you take constructive criticism and you act upon it, you're gonna do well eventually. It might not happen tonight, it might not happen tomorrow, it might not happen in a couple months, but it should happen hopefully by the end of the course, and that's what this course is about. So thank you so much for tuning in for this 30+ minutes. I hope you found it useful. If you have any more questions, obviously you know where to find me. I will see you guys in class. And if you're not one of my students, I hope you found this useful. See you later. Ciao.